Just so you know, usually our ECOS community calls are very informal. I hope to have this as an informal call as well, but we're recording this and it will be posted on YouTube. So when it comes to today's topic, we will discuss large-scale CO2 removal. What is it? And how can the youth help govern it? And we have two speakers today. We have first Bindu Bhandari, us from Nepal, and representing Climate Interactive, an organization established by a project initiative established by MIT Sloan School. And Bindu has extensive experience from the youth climate movement. I've known Bindu since a while, and I've had the chance to talk to her and to even to work more deeply on this issue, youth empowerment, youth climate empowerment, and also in particular this simulation software, the En-ROAD software that we will test carbon dioxide removal scenarios today with. And we also have Kai-Uwe Schmidt with us from the Carnegie Climate Governance Initiative, or other names known as C2G. And Kai-Uwe has over 20 years of experience at organizations like the UNFCCC, the World Bank. He has worked under the Office of the Executive Office of the Secretary General of the United Nations. And now he is working at the Carnegie Climate Governance Initiative, more specifically at the regarding on multilateral issues around climate governance. So the idea is that first we're gonna see and use this En-ROAD simulator software to see what scenarios, climate scenarios, temperature scenarios do we get if we test carbon dioxide removal actions. So the first speaker is gonna be Bindu, and I'd like to ask you, Bindu, to turn on your camera or leave on your camera and start sharing your screen. And we're gonna follow that with Kai-Uwe's guiding questions and framing around governance issues of CDR, which will be then followed by your questions and hopefully a discussion.
So hi everyone, thanks so much Victor for that friendly introduction. As Victor just introduced, I come from this climate change campaigning background. So I was a long-time climate change campaigner, and now into my professional life, I'm currently working with Climate Interactive, and the tool that I will be showing the demo of the simulator that Victor mentioned, En-ROAD, is developed by Climate Interactive and MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative. I see some familiar names over here who might already be familiar with the tool. So this will just be, just as a heads up, this will just be a quick demo, and for any further conversation and interest on the tool, of course, I will leave the link, email address to get further in touch so that you can explore more. So I would like to now share my screen. Yeah, so here you can see this is the interface of En-ROAD simulator. It's a freely available tool. You can check it out by yourself at enroads.org. And on the left, here is a graph that shows sources of net carbon dioxide removal. And on the right, I have pulled greenhouse gas net emissions by gas. So these are the two graphs that I have chosen, but you can, of course, there are a lot of graphs you can change as you'd like to view. For example, if you click the title of the graph over here, you can see a lot of different options and you can go through it. But for the purpose of today's discussion, I thought these two graphs would be most useful. Before I dive right into the carbon dioxide removal options over here, there are 18 total policy sliders in this simulator. And you can just stick with this basic interface and move the sliders. So as to, for example, as I moved energy efficiency, you can either highly increase, or maybe electrification, or maybe subsidizing renewable, taxing coal, maybe increasing the energy efficiency in building and industry. As you see, this works really fast. And as I move the sliders, you can see the changes over here. So from the business as usual scenario, where we have 4.1 degrees Celsius temperature rise by the end of the century, as I moved some sliders and took some actions, you can see that it is now 3.2 degrees Celsius. So these actions have helped us reduce temperature and bring it down to 3.2 degrees Celsius. So I can reset all these policies and assumptions as I did. But if you see in this business as usual scenario, here this area, this large waves, as you can see, the blackest area over here, this is energy carbon dioxide. This is where most of our greenhouse gas emissions is coming from. And as I am moving again, this sliders, you can see how these areas are shrinking. So if I say, for example, methane and other gases reduce emissions, highly reduced, you see this blue area, this blue waves represented for methane, emissions from methane, has now shrunken and become a very small area. So this is the interface. Now moving to our topic of carbon dioxide removal, there are a lot of options under this detailed settings, which you can access through these three little dots. So I'm now moving towards technological carbon removal and show you what options are available here. So I click the three dots and use detailed settings, yes. So as you can see, there are options. So BEX is here. You can specify the percentage of maximum potential for bioenergy, carbon capture and storage. We also have direct air capture, enhanced mineralization, agriculture soil carbon sequestration, which has been rising a lot in discussion these days. And the next available option is biochar. Beside this, we of course have afforestation as a different slider. So these five options of technological carbon dioxide removal are available in the En-ROADS tool, and we can adjust and move the sliders for each of them. But having said that, I would also like to mention a lot of new emerging technologies are brought into discussion these days. But with En-ROADS, it is a scientifically valid tool made with the best available science, and we have not incorporated every technologies that have come and been discussed about, but we are keeping an eye on those which have shows great potential and are emerging as more promising. So these five were the available options under technological carbon removal, and we have afforestation as a separate slider. And under the detail settings for afforestation as well, you can see many options that can be adjusted. Also, if you are not happy or very satisfied, if you think something differently than what is shown as default in this simulator, what you can also do is, in the simulation tab over here, if you go, you can actually change the assumptions that are used in this tool. So as I said, this is a very transparent tool, and everything can be seen over here, what is the source of the data that we are getting from. For example, in the assumptions, there is this option, carbon dioxide removal maximum. So if I take an example of agricultural soil carbon, for example, by default, so it is set at 5.5 gigatons carbon dioxide per year. But if you think this is less, you can of course move this slider and change the assumptions to the maximum available. Or if you think this is a little too high, the default cases, you can of course move the assumptions to a lower value. And where does this value come from? If you click this little triangle over here, you can see the sources: Royal Society and Royal Academy of Engineering 2018. So this is about the tool. So I will again reset assumptions and policies. And since many of you might be interested in the topic, I'm going into the detailed settings of this carbon removal, technological carbon removal, and move some of these sliders, and so what happens when I move them. So I'm using the detail settings, and I would like to draw your attention towards these graphs on the left and right, and notice how different lines, different area changes. So for example, let me start with direct air capture. So percentage of maximum potential says 59%. You can see this direct air capture. This area over here has increased and rise over the period of time, but direct air capture start year is set at 2030 by default, but I can make it as immediate as possible. For example, let's imagine it starts next year. It's 2021. So what happens? You can see this area increases. But the key thing to notice here is, even if we take immediate action, even if direct air capture starts right immediately next year, as you can see in the graph here, it takes quite a good bit of time. It is only till like late 2040s that it actually starts capturing carbon dioxide enough from the atmosphere. It is because of the nature of this large-scale carbon dioxide removal, which Kai will be speaking in after some time. Of course, there are so many uncertainties related to this large-scale carbon dioxide removal, and because these are new technologies, there are uncertain risks associated with it. Along with that, there are also equity considerations related. So taking all these factors and the time needed for actual deployment to the scale that makes impact, there is, you can see, slight delay between when we take action and when it actually makes an impact. So if I move the slider of direct air capture to the maximum, notice what happens to the temperature over here. So I said is 100%, that is the maximum potential available. So notice the change again. So when it was at 0, I mean, no action was taken in direct air capture, versus when we have taken maximum action, that is 100% of potential to capture carbon dioxide from direct air capture, you can notice that the temperature has reduced from 4.1 degrees Celsius to 4 degrees Celsius. This is to say that it helped. Of course, it did 0.1 degrees Celsius, but of course, this is not a magical solution, as sometimes it may be debated as. There are other options that we can play around and explore further. If you want to test out, please unmute and see if there is any of these solutions that you are keen to explore. If not, for the moment, I'm moving the agricultural soil carbon sequestration. So here I am, for example, let's set this at 50% and see what happens to the graph on the left and the right. Now this area represented by agricultural soil carbon, so you can see that this area has started increasing. So you can see this waves clearly visible over here, represented in this light alloys color over here. And what you can notice in the graph over on the right here is actually from the emissions, we have now other CDR represented by this silver area over here. We have actually started pulling out carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. If you put your cursor over here, you can see that it is very interactive. You can see what is that, like it's 4.49 gigaton carbon dioxide per year in 2016. You can see all the numbers over here. I would like to pause over here and check with Viktor if there is anything that he would like to add.
I think at this point, people are just probably getting excited to use the simulator themselves. I've been hesitating to paste it in the chat box, but just go on, Bindu, and we'll get there.
Yeah, true, very true. So as I said, given the time limit, I'm just keeping it to a few of these CDR options and just showing you this as a demo. You can, of course, explore this simulator by yourself. But the key point here, as we move these sliders, it is easy to move here, but the point that needs to be considered is the equity consideration, especially when you talk about carbon dioxide removal. And in the simulator itself, you can see some of the pointers about, if you click this I button over here, you can see some of the examples of what exactly does this slider entail, what is the big masses, what are the key dynamics, what are the potential benefit, but also the equity considerations, and also more details about slider settings. So this interface in itself is as descriptive as it can be made. If you click on any of the points, for example, some of our new friends might be interested in what exactly is this biochar. So if you click this little triangle over here, you can see a little description saying what is biochar exactly and what does this slider mean. So a lot of informations are embedded here. And if I don't want to use any of the detail settings, but want to address this slider as a whole, which is represented here as carbon removal. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to move this slider, not going into one by one specific, but addressing this as a whole and see how much of a difference does this technological carbon removal make. But before I move the slider, think in your head, how much do you think this temperature, as shown 4.1 degrees Celsius, will go down as I move this to the midpoint or halfway over here? Just think and see if that matches what you actually thought just now. Wow. So 0.2 degrees Celsius reduction as I move this slider of technological carbon removal from status quo to medium growth. So 0.2 degrees Celsius is of course a great contribution, but as we say with our training and webinar, there is no silver bullet in addressing climate change. We need a silver box set, or if not to use the language as a bullet or so on, we also say that it needs one seed cannot plant a garden. You of course need a lot of seed to plant a garden, which means a lot of different actions are needed, of course, to achieve what we had envisioned during Paris Agreement, that is limiting warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. Technological carbon removal helps, large-scale carbon dioxide helps, but of course, this is not the magical solution, and there is a lot of points to be considered in terms of equity. I think I will stop over here, and I'll be happy to take more questions later if we have time. But just to mention, if you have any questions, you can reach out to us anytime. You can email us at support@climateinteractive.org. Or you can also drop in the chat box, drop your question in the chat box, and I'll be happy to answer. Thanks so much, Victor. Over to you.
Sweet. Sounds good, Bindu. And I think it's pretty impressive. We have moved 0.3 degrees Celsius, starting from 4.1 Celsius degrees. And by only, as you see from all these levers, by only playing with carbon dioxide removal, we have achieved this much. This is probably not the maximum, but as you see, we used a lot of the potential of these technologies. Anyway, I think at this point the conversation is ripe to give some framing to this with Kai-Uwe, and I'd like to ask you, Kai-Uwe, to share your screen. I see still Bindu's screen.
Okay, let me see if I can just do it. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bindu, for you presenting the En-ROADS simulator, which is a really impressive and incredible helpful tool, which we have with Climate Interactive and with yourself used on many occasions to help the crowd, the people in the audience, in the group, to get a sense about the impact, as you mentioned, of CDR or of these new technologies. So my presentation, I had basically two guiding questions for my presentation, and I will focus on the first one because that's going to take 15 minutes. We can drive into more detail in what I'm presenting, but just to get the overview and the common basis of the various aspects, I just need the time of 50 minutes. And I also want to mention at this occasion that you saw we are relatively, a few numbers here in terms of from our team. With me is Mark and Celine. Mark is the director of comms, and Celine is our comms officer. I have Nick, who is the director for knowledge management, and we have now, last but certainly not least, Michael, who is our focal point on carbon dioxide removal. We have another one on solar radiation modification, but so here we are, and they're here in order to basically assure that I don't see anything stupid, but more importantly, they know I don't know. So here we go. They are here for the Q&A in order to help us dive deeper if there's necessity. Now, with no further ado, a quick word. You mentioned we are part of and I would underline the time-bound initiative of the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs. We have a time limit by end of 2023. Either our mission is achieved or, too bad for it, so to say. So, and our mission is to catalyze the creation of effective governance for climate altering technologies with regard to two big baskets of technologies. No need to mention them right now. We are guided by principles, which you can also read on our website. The first and most important one is we are impartial with regard to choices of using, not using, promoting, not promoting the technological approaches which we are talking about. We are, on the other hand, the principle is that we are guided by the fact that there is a need for governance. We are strong word, we are advocating that there is a need for governance in order to help addressing these issues around those approaches. We are definitely guided by the principle of a rule of international law. That is just by combining IPCC and the climate change negotiations, it is clear that our mission has a raison d'etre and a value, because as also Bindu was showing us through the simulator, you get the sense is that there's no way around large-scale removal. It's more about which, when, how, and those choices need to be made. And when you make choices, it's about risk. And so we are guided by a broad risk management approach, which is you look at not only at the risk of doing something, but also at the risks of not doing something. And in both cases, what are the governance challenges and governance that is needed, and have, the societies think about that. And fundamentally, not fundamentally, the last one basically is about preparedness, is that I think a number of recent events in our common history shows that we are not very good in taking effective decisions in an unprepared environment. And so preparedness, being ready to take decisions in an informed manner, in an inclusive manner, etc., is part of that preparedness principle. So I took a bit time for that. The next one, which is important, I think, in these conversations to highlight, which we constantly realize and we grapple ourselves with it, is the term governance. The term governance is often seen as government, the rules and regulations, but it's actually more. For us, it's basically what also IPCC takes is, it's about the process. It's about the ensuring that the interlocutors from all across the society are coming together in diverse processes, actually, to discuss, learn, share knowledge, take decisions at multiple levels. If you wish, what we're doing today is part of the governance in relation to these technological approaches. And then finally, we are, because of that, we have a catalytic mission, so we are only to basically make people think, make people act, and that's about it. So we are hence trying to interact with all kind of interlocutors, whether this is governments, international bodies, support, whether these are the seers or the non-state actors, and actors such as the young people's groups, so to say. That's where we are trying to interact, in particular because we are big and we are small, in order to basically work with those who have a catalytic effect in themselves, because they're running a network, they have the ability to reach out to many, and then have the conversation and create conversations around these issues. And then the last point is, of course, very important to make, is that carbon dioxide removal, or these issues are not taking place in a vacuum on their own. And I'm probably preaching to you understand this all very well. We are on a development pathway as the world, and we have set ourselves a sustainable development pathway, and we have 20 goals coming up 2030, and it's directly linked to how to actually maximize benefits, minimize risks in achieving the diverse and multiple goals which we have set ourselves. Now, the next point, which I think is important to make, is about what is carbon dioxide removal and what is it not, so to say. It is a human activity of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store this in a durable fashion in various ways. But it's the important. It's human, it is CO2, and it's coming out of the atmosphere and putting it somewhere else. That's basically the IPCC. Other people, it's referred to as greenhouse gas removal. That's mostly often used also by those who think it's not only CO2, it could be other gases, even though there's not much happening in other gases. And some refer to it as negative emissions, but these terms are also used in different ways. But it's certainly not, I think this important point we wanted to make upfront is it's not carbon capture and storage. Why? Because carbon capture and storage refers to a particular way of removing the carbon at the point source of production, that, for example, a chimney. So it's combined with the use of fossil fuels. So that's basically what is the common understanding of carbon capture and storage. While carbon dioxide removal is the definition, or the understanding is that's the removal from the ambient air and then store it away. So it is not something which is attached necessarily to the source. And when one does these kind of definitions, I can give you right away an example where you would say, but wait a second, bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, isn't this a source of energy and right away capturing it? So it's still a bit of a challenge, but just as a very basic differentiation is something is picking it at source and the other one is taking it out of the ambient air. Now, why are we concerned about this? And I think Bindu, and when you play the En-ROADS exercise, you will get to that. There's the report on the 1.5 goal on the Paris Agreement is very clear. There's no way that we're going to get to these levels without large carbon dioxide removal activities. Like in the En-ROADS game, basically, there are many pathways and many combinations of policies and measures which will get you there. The IPCC 1.5 basically played 4 scenarios. All of these scenarios, as I said, you need large amounts of removals. Now, if you look at the one which is taking a rapid, transformative decarbonization, we do everything, you forget politics, technical approach, we do that, right? Whatever we know, including using nuclear. There's, I think, a 50% increase of nuclear with regard to the 2010 levels or something like that. Anyhow, rapid decarbonization. But that scenario gives us the chance to work the removal activities by drawing on afforestation, agriculture and land use change measures in order to bind the carbon and store it away. But the challenge is also interesting to see on this little graph here is to show us that we're talking about a sector of these things together, which is currently emitting some 20%, and you want to turn this around into the next 30 years, that it begins to remove 1 or 2 gigatons of carbon. So that's the challenge which we have. That means governance, okay? Now, we talked about CDR and various approaches. Again, we don't have the time here to dive into all of these and list them and name them. There's no way that we get in 50 minutes, but we can do this in the Q&A, and we're happy to organize other events if this is helpful, you know, picking some of these. But I think the important thing is to just be aware that we have land-based and marine approaches, and we have those which are nature-based. And I mentioned afforestation and enhancing soil carbon, technological approaches such as direct air capture or enhanced weathering and ocean alkalinity. I can't even pronounce the word. And we have hybrid approaches which are combining the two of them. So you have, that's at least the grid of thinking, and they bring around the challenges of governance. And governance is about asking the questions as to what are my questions around these issues? What do I want to achieve with this? How is equity dealt with? How is what happens if we are driving now to scale afforestation and but what happens with the people who are growing land? So what do we do? So fundamental, the governance challenge is to how does the society decide on the mix and the scale of activities to remove the CO2 which is required to keep warming under 1.5 or 2 degrees? Because even in 2 degrees, we will have to remove carbon. If we can't manage that, we won't get to 2 degrees, at least with our current understanding and knowledge. So it is how to make those decisions, find the questions and have the processes in place. That was the kind of questions. From there, basically, the team, which was at the origin of this initiative, basically asked the question, fine, if we accept that challenge, okay, then are we ready? Can we tomorrow start doing this? Driving the decisions, driving the choices, monitor, etc. And so we did a report together with Climate Analytics. You might be familiar with them. They draw on their whole global expertise in order to look at provisions out there. What do we have in place, and where are the gaps, and to identify the readiness. And you can imagine the answers: we are not ready. So the first answer is what governance exists. Again, can't go into the details of it. There are many which are relating and interacting with these various approaches and technologies which come into play. At international levels, you see some 6 or so here. It goes from FAO to CCD, Climate the Desertification Convention, UNFCCC, the London Protocol and its convention, or the convention and its protocol. UNEP as a knowledge base play a role and have impact there, and might have gaps in this relation. But just to see that's where governance exists and where the gaps exist. Now, if you look at the gaps around governance, again, we have all these approaches here, and the key point, I think, at this point to take along with, which probably you know or you might not know, is that it's CDR challenges are diverse depending on the various approaches. We have then different challenges with regard to the specific one, and then we have common ones. And let me dive maybe here a bit deeper at some of the common challenges. We can come back through Q&A and look at the one or the other if you want to in the Q&A context, or maybe in the context when we do something in the end-notes, we can jump over to this one. So what are the kind of common gaps? The first one is, how the hell are we going to get this, the rapid scale up? And the challenge becomes bigger the less we're going to be able to reduce emissions, because if we are serious about the 1.5 or 2 degrees, the more, that's a direct link. So if we then, so that's a scale up, and you're talking about big numbers. It's a bit 100 to 1,000 billion tons. I can't even imagine what it is, but if you want to imagine this, we are currently emitting some 40 gigatons, and you're thinking of reducing between 2-3 per year, starting in some 10 years or something like that, and even more so in the most aggressive scenarios. And then you have roles in that scale up. There's of course the push of saying we want, which could be youth and others, and or contributing to solutions and ideas. You have call it the traditional actors, whether this is the government or the private sector, because how can you get involved in them? I will not go into the detail of that. Sustainable development, all of them have the Sustainable Development Goals challenge, is that we have the 17 goals. Climate change in itself will challenge the achievement in itself of these goals, but then by deploying some of these approaches, we'll have interrelations between the various SDG goals. So about 2018, we asked ourselves the question, or one asked the question, okay, what do we know about these interrelations? That's part of governance, understanding and making this available, this information available, generate it, get it done. And here basically it's difficult to see. It's available on our website. You can use the QR code there to get to the publication. And we are updating this currently because that's a 2018 exercise, and we're currently getting it updated in a way that it might find its way into the next assessment report, at least that kind of understanding or that information. It is basically, we said, let's take it, let's ask a group of people to look at, put yourself into an advocate or somebody who wants to do a particular technology and see where do you see interlinkages with regard to the various SDGs, or you look at an SDG, whether this is equity or whether this is gender or whether this is water or whether this is life in land or in water, and see what is it actually that we know. And this analysis was focused on risks. I should maybe mention that a little bit. So the concern was focusing more on the risks than on the what do we know in terms of getting it, making it happen, so that you have the both sides where you have to make your decision making. Anyhow, you see there are lots of red points. Red points means risk. Dark gray would mean that is a gap identified. And then there are these light gray things where we don't even know whether we have a research gap or it's not even identified. So one hasn't even thought this through in a sense. Now, there are more common challenges which I want to point to, of course, which are more obvious, I guess, when you just think this on a step back perspective, is that, of course, monitoring, reporting, and verification is not at pace and scale, so to say, of the challenges and use of the of these removals in various dimensions. There are, of course, the storage challenges in terms of durability of the permanence, saturation of where you store some of these of the molecules, etc., or the binded CO2. Then you have questions about liability and redress, directly linked to the one before, would be, okay, what the hell is going to happen, and how do you deal with the fact that somebody really, a storage is breaking up and it's releasing the CO2, but also about how do you deal with the fact that an implementation of a particular approach is creating imbalances, inequitable delivery? How do you have to compensate for people for the space they were occupying, whatever these issues are? And there are many of those. Public awareness is, of course, a common governance challenge. What is it? How do we ensure that the public knows about it, can be part of the decision making, and so forth? And finally, intergenerational equity. I'm coming to my conclusions, which is basically repeating is that all proposed approaches have risks, costs, and trade-off, but also potential opportunities. And the challenge in governance is, how do you match this? What do you need to be able to make decisions in that space? There's absolutely no risk-free option with any of these approaches. When you think nature-based, it is you push to scale, there's a risk of impacting on something else. You have risks about permanence to ensure that the carbon is stored ad infinitum, at least the mass which you have put away, and many things of the nature. There's not, and Bindu was clearly pointing to that, there is not a single and simple solution. It's a basket. We have to basically pull a portfolio together, which is also a good opportunity. I mean, to the extent you can make choices of less of but more different. And the other important point is always to make, of course, it is not replacing any form of emission cuts. Any emission cut not done is a bigger carbon dioxide removal challenge, excuse me. And then 4 more things is that important points, none of them are ready at scale or price point needed in order to get them going now, today. And we saw we have to, Bindu was indicating, we have to begin. Governance is needed both to regulate, protect, but also to provide the incentives to get to scale or get the knowledge or get and so forth. And that governance takes place at different levels. These are the actors. It's the local issues around where things are happening, to recognition and being assured that whatever is being done at the various national, subnational, and regional levels is actually compatible and comparable, and that we are bringing the globe into the right direction collectively. And with this, I think I was trying to get us to a kind of a common point, common issue points. I might have jumped about the number too fast, but happy to now go into Q&A and draw on my colleagues here. I hope I wasn't too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai-Uwe. And when it comes to the main, one of the main questions that we are trying to ask here today is how can we diversify? How can we diversify this governance conversation into something where youth can participate as well? And this webinar is actually a continuation of an event, or actually a series of events that C2G has initiated with young people and involving young people in this conversation. And I see that some of you are perhaps new to the ECOS community calls, and yeah, with a Q&A, we'd like to open the floor for that. And I would ask you all to now turn on your cameras, and we will unmute you after you have signaled your intention to speak up. And the way we're gonna do this is by raising a hand in the camera, or if you're shy for that, just raise your hand in the Zoom application. So let's see. Do I see any hands up in the camera? Yes, I see Ashish. Please go ahead, unmute yourself, Ashish.
Hello, everyone. It was really interesting and insightful as well. So my question is that, like, I'm from Nepal, and like I have observed massive collective action problems among youths, like which could have stemmed from lower level of awareness or apathy about climate change in itself. So how do you think that C2G can catalyze to mainstream such youths from global south in the governance issues pertaining to large-scale CO2 removal technologies?
Mm-hmm. Yep, a straightforward question. Bindu, Kai-Uwe, who wants to go for this?
Oh,
Kai is better suited to get to this.
I am better suited. Okay, yeah, but because I'm going. No, just to react to you, so what we can do and what we're trying to do is basically provide information and or get access to have your voice being heard. And we can do this at the globe, so we'll try the best we can. What we have done is we do, in our approach, we are trying to not only focus, let's say, on the global intergovernment exercises, but also regionally oriented or thematic oriented fora. And so one which probably might directly be and we are advanced in different ways into this. And as regards Nepal, we have been working on our sorry, got distracted. We are working on the mountain region countries and trying to use their kind of forum to bring that question in. And in those conversations which are going on, finding a good event. There was supposed to be a global event taking place this year, which got postponed. Then basically in that context, reach out to you and find ways of having you come into it. But actually, I would like to turn back the question to you. What would you see, based on your experience, would be a good way of getting you into these conversations? And what would you need for doing it? Let's put it this way.
Okay. So for this, I think the best way, like I find among youths, like especially in South Asian region, I think like even if they have like a little bit, like little understanding about climate change, but like they are not, like there's a massive collective action problem because like they have this commitment problem, and what C2G can do is, or C2G or any other organization can do is like try to disseminate this information more, because like whatever I see here, like from C2G, the governance challenges and everything, it's really informative. And I think that like many youths don't even have, although it's free and is open access, but I think the C2G can try to disseminate this information more, so that like
thank you very much. Okay, no, thank you very much, and we'll try our best, and feel free to share our information. We are trying to produce them in languages to some extent, at least some core informations in languages. Not all of them, of course, only a few, but we're trying to do that, and this definitely we will try to do. And we'll try also to, we are trying to do also to pull in conversations of events to test when there's a readiness of the groups to be able to speak in fora in terms of having understood and having your position, which you would want to convey, then I mean, we are trying to find speaker slots, or we can organize things on our website. Like now we have to do everything online, right? You know, that's the kind of things we are happy to do and work and enable you as actors, that you have the information to then, you know, to do the things you do, so to say. Right.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Following Ashish, I saw Will, your hand up. You still like to ask the question, or Ed? Not anymore. All right. Who else would like to ask a question or say something? David, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, please. Thank you. And thank you and congratulations for this wonderful presentation. I think when we look at what happened in the classes, when we want to make some climate education, what we observe is that very, very often we put a lot of stress on studying the impacts, and with a lot of catastrophism, etc. And this En-ROADS simulator offers a very good opportunity not to work only on the impact, but also on the solutions. And so my concern is that I am basically working with primary and secondary school teachers, so teachers who have 9 to 15 years old students. And I was wondering how it is possible to use En-ROADS for such young students, not university students or high school students, but for lower secondary school students, let's say for 13 to 15 years old students. Do you have experience of such an usage, and what can we do?
Yeah, that's a great question, David. Thank you for asking that. So we do have experience running En-ROADS with a very wide range of audience and with lower secondary students as well. I'll be happy to share more information about that. But for now, what I would like to say is We also have another tool. I just talked about En-ROADS today, which is the newest simulator and which focuses on policy and actions. But we also have another tool, which is open access, of course, C-ROADS, which is also a simulation, and it is more of a simulation of a COP, what actually happens in the real COP. So participants are divided into different countries and negotiating blocks, and they discuss their strategy of negotiation. So it is more like COP. And this has been very popular among middle school students and even primary level school students. So I'll be happy to share the link to both and discuss further on this with you. But yeah, two options are available, and I'd like to let it up to you to pick which one suits the best for your students.
Thank you.
Thanks. Frank, I see you have a question. Or
okay, this is a question to both Bindu and Kai. So first of all, Bindu, it's great to actually see your face after several years of corresponding. I've used both C-ROADS and En-ROADS quite a bit with my students. And I particularly appreciate about En-ROADS being, well, about both programs being able to pull down, see what the assumptions are, and see what the sources of information are. Kai, when you had a slide up that was a cross-reference of the different sequestration options, cross-reference with the SDGs, and with that I noticed the little colored blobs indicating the different levels of risk and such things. I'm wondering, have you folks been in conversation with each other in terms of coordinating those aspects of the technological and biological removal and En-ROADS with that particular chart that you were showing? Because it seems to me there's a real strong instructional opportunity there.
Bindu, you want to answer?
Yeah, sure. So good to see you, Frank, first of all. And the next is, yeah, we have been in constant communication with our colleagues from C2G and our co-director, Andrew Jones. He has been, I think, talking for a while and on many different aspects. But I think our current focus now is especially having more options in the land and agriculture sector. So our modeling team is working hard on that, and we are also in constant touch with C2Z to see how better we can capture those different dynamics involved, especially from the especially with the nature-based solutions and things like that, mostly dealing with land and agriculture aspect of carbon dioxide removal. And Kai, if you'd like to add anything further.
No, I think you covered it. I think that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, with regard to this particular publication, we are trying to update it because I mean, it's there's evolution, and this particular graph was looking actually at the understanding of the interrelation, whether this is risk or benefit, so to say. But yes, there's the connection then to the simulator itself.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Frank.
Chloe, I saw you had a question. Would you like to go ahead?
Sure, thank you. Hi, hello everyone. I think the question of engaging youth in carbon dioxide removal is very linked to engaging young people in climate governance in general, because for assisting the COP in Poland, for instance, there was not a lot of young people there. So thank you very much for doing this for us and for engaging us with the topic. My question is related to the governance of such technologies that ought to be integrated into pre-existing sets of institutional paradigms and cultures. So my question is, from what you saw by interacting with those professionals, how do we not only create the type of governance settings that we need, but really make sure that these technologies may integrate culturally into those standards or ways of doing things that are inherited? Thank you.
No, let me, not that I don't have a view, but why don't can I ask maybe either Nick or Mark or Michael, if you want to react to that question. Maybe I see Michael given the mic, or Mark maybe, or one of you, so that you don't sit here for nothing.
Nick, please, I see you're prepared, and I think you'd have a good response to this.
Sure, happy to. This actually is a good question in terms of cultural appropriateness, and it sort of links from the previous question about overlaying these risks to the different dimensions of development with these different technologies. And you heard Kai talk about portfolios, and we're at a stage now where different countries and different legislations need to be thinking about the portfolio of options that they bring together to tackle this problem. And in that process, if they don't have the correct information, not just about the technical potential, which we're learning more about, but about these risks, intended or unintended, known and unknown, then they may make poor decisions. Just in the same way that you intimate, these approaches and these portfolio of options need to be made culturally appropriate, and in terms of, for example, how land use is managed in different countries, and the afforestation or the biochar solutions, these nature-based solutions. So there's a very important question here: is there sufficient capacity at national level to really fully understand the implications of these different options? What options are available on a wider kind of analysis about cultural impacts, about impacts on other areas of development? Now, some advanced countries like the UK, for example, WWF sponsored the government of Scotland to do analysis of where the potential was for greenhouse gas removal or carbon dioxide removal, and to get the government starting thinking about that. And the UK have now used the same economists to produce an analysis to think about that. And they're in a more advanced stage than many countries. But of course, there are a lot of countries out there that don't have that analytic capacity and aren't thinking through these options more thoroughly, let alone the implications on intergenerational impacts or cultural impacts. So it's a very timely question, and it's something that needs to be incorporated into the deliberation, I think, at national level and at thematic level in focused groups such as this.
Thank you.
All right, Timothy, I see you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Victor. Everyone, good to see friendly faces. Timothy Damon from Global Youth Development Institute. Was happy to attend some of the previous C2G events that have happened on this topic. Glad we're keeping momentum during the pandemic. My question for you, Kai, is you mentioned you have your own timeline for the initiative, which is to 2023. And I'm curious if that is intended to synergize at all with the global stocktake timeline as well, because you mentioned the different avenues, and one of these, I think, very importantly, is the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And at some point, they'll need to take some kind of decision on this, I would think. And then building on Chloe as well, these are spaces that are very difficult for young people to access, especially in a substantive way rather than a token way. So how do you think C2G would be able to help more young people to overcome that barrier, for example, by using some of your convening power or other means that would be able to help facilitate that? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so 2 dimensions. Let me react, and then I'll probably ask one of my colleagues to come in. So on the timeline, yeah, there's a reason as to why. And you said you had the trigger points. Is 2023 is a critical year, stocktake. Before that, we have the IPCC 6th assessment report coming out, which is going to be in 2022. And it begins next year, 2021. Beginning next year, like in April, if timeline still is hold, we'll have the first report of the Working Group 1 coming out. And governments have asked IPCC to look at not only how CDR is going to be able to assist in terms of pathways going forward, in terms of dealing with the climate change problem, but also with the other bucket of technologies we haven't talked about here, which is just focusing on modifying the temperature. It's like, buying a parasol, I think is the term in French. So we see that over this time span between now and the global stocktake, between the climate change process and the global development process, there will be enough question marks out there that we will have hopefully successfully catalyzed those which have to answer the question marks, either singular or collectively, to have the attention span there. And that's where you think if we are successful by that time, we have not only raised awareness and provided some learning opportunities and exercises, but we have also basically made ourselves redundant in terms of that intergovernmental actors have taken up our role of facilitating conversations. Actors have picked up the question of creating knowledge products which are suited for particular groups. So that's basically why we are time bound and by 2023, because 2023, I mean, that's 7 years before 2030, and a quarter of the century is more or less gone. The pressures to kind of deal with the issues, but also to jump to quick conclusions around some of these technologies is very high. And that's basically why we have the time bound and why we give this sometimes uncomfortable feeling that there are these guys who are pushing the technologies while we are pushing the conversation around that. Now, on the substantive part, and Mark and others, please react to it. I mean, so first of all, important thing to say, I think we don't have the bandwidth to change governance problems of the world. I mean, we'll try to contributing while we have this other little mission of getting these things sorted out to try to address as much as we can. So that's also, you know, a good reason for us to be with you and see how we can help you and give you, and I think you have a right point to make, the substantive ability to show your substantive engagement and not just being a token of, you know, being there and, you know, youth check, gender check kind of environment, right? And here we are definitely open. Mark, please come in. I mean, we have events which we're organizing or co-organizing, and we'll increasingly that you feel that you have the substance and or you have a representational voice even to find ways of injecting it into it, but on a substantive way. And I think that's important. I think Mark, definitely please come in, and if anyone else wants to come on the time and other aspects.
Sure. Hi Tim, how are you doing? So it's one of these interesting things. We are never going to be the sort of front and center, you know, organizing lots of people to do things. Our basic role is to try and find ways to sort of basically say, this is something really important happening. Here is information about it. We can produce, you know, we've got increasing capacity to produce, you know, films and infographics and evidence briefs and all the rest of it. We do this as a matter of course. One question might be, to what extent can we work with somebody, and we're always looking for partners rather than doing it just ourselves as far as possible. To what extent can we work with people to create products that are particularly geared towards younger people, maybe in tone, maybe in content, I don't know. We need to be guided as much and learn as much from you guys as the other way around. We have the capacity and resources to create these products, to host events like this, or, you know, as we begin to go a little bit more online in various meetings. But we're very keen to work with all sorts of networks. We've approached Youngo and say, can we do a series of it could either be webinars like this, or it could be smaller, more intimate, like we call them fireside chats or campfire chats, I think was the phrase we came up with. But we're basically where we got a group of maybe 10 people who have already learned a bit about the issue, because, you know, there's the sort of 101 we can do on this is conduct, so removal here are the issues. But then get a group of, let's say, 10 people and really dig into how do we go about amplifying, you know, people's concerns and put them into the governance conversation. And it could be through all sorts of means. It can be through creation of joint positions, statements, you know, it could be us helping, you know, at various meetings we go to, show videos where young people express their concerns and issues and beliefs and passions and desires. We could actually maybe, even when some meetings happen, you know, facilitate introductions. I mean, all of these options are open. What we really need to do primarily, though, I think, is start from the starting point of, you know, find groups of people who begin to go, no, this is a thing. It's more complicated than we thought. There's actually an awful lot to learn about this. How do we learn about this? And then go about bringing that to, you know, various different fora. So in a way, often people say, well, what can C2G do to help us do? Well, it always ends up with a sense of throwing it back, saying, well, what would you like to do? How can we support you to do that? And then you end up with this ping pong. Well, no, you say something. No, you say something. And you sort of go back and forth. But the basic idea is the last thing we want to be as an initiative is, we think the youth should do this. You know, I mean, that's just not who we are. We're all about saying, here's the thing, what can we do to help you meet the right people, learn the right things, amplify your, but it's always going to be that we can add, multipliers, but we're never going to replace or even dream of replacing the organizing capacity of existing, young people's groups, because quite frankly, you can teach us far more about organizing than we can teach you. So I would say that please, 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 if you find this interesting, if you have any ideas, we can always dream up a way of supporting it and making it happen. We're very keen in Youngo to see if there's any way in which there can be perhaps, but without sort of saying this is what it should be, but what room is there, to create, thematic groups, to make statements, which we can then, in our conversations with opinion leaders, ministers, and all the rest of it, say, hey, have you seen what, these people have said about this? This is something worthwhile listening to. So in a sense, we can help put what young people say in front of new ears and maybe even facilitate that process, but we're never going to say this is how to do it. So, but please, please, everybody come to us, write us emails, and we'll work things out.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this kind of finishing thought, Mark. And you may see that there is the other way. There is
Kai as well. You had one more point there.
Well, I was going to say in my introduction, I forgot to mention, but now you noticed why Mark is our youth focal point, and he's just certainly more lively and has the right sense of things. So just wanted to make sure that it's also clear. He's our youth man for good reasons, supported by Celine.
Yeah, and as said, in order to make that interaction, that engagement happen between you, others, and C2G, let's make sure to continue this discussion either through a follow-up webinar. We're happy to do that, a follow-up event, or leave your impressions at this survey that you see the link next to my face here. Let's keep this thing going, and I'm really grateful. Thank you for all being here. Thank you for Kai-Uwe, the whole C2G team, for being here and being supportive. Thank you, Bindu, and thank you to the ECOS community. Please let's keep this going.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, and bye-bye. Hope to be in touch.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you all.
Sorry, I need permission from Mark, I guess, to enable my screen sharing. Mark, can you please?
Mark, if you can go to the security button and just allow others to share screen, that should fix it.
I'm sorry, but the screen sharing is okay. I'm sorry. Okay, that should work now. My apologies. Bindu, can you try your screen share again, please?
All right. Sorry for the disruption. This might take a couple of more steps by the time we get Bindu's screen shared with all of you, as I don't see Bindu at the very moment in our call.
I'm afraid we lost her.
All right, perhaps she's retrying to connect so that she can share her screen. Yeah, it's supposed to be an interactive part of this call, sharing her screen and sharing the simulator software with all of you. And later on in the discussion, we will be able to get back to that interactive simulator and test actions or test your questions. And in case Bindu cannot join back, I guess we will have to change the order and go on with the Kai-Uwe's framing and content. Yeah. Well, for the time being, I guess we can. I don't know if it's an internet connection issue or if it's just our platform, but it's a very general issue that comes up. All right, I see Bindu connected back.
So sorry about the technical glitch. I just lost the connection. So I guess I can share my screen now.
While Bindu's doing that, I'm going to suggest anyone who is not presenting, if you can turn off your video, that will help us preserve bandwidth. Thank you.
Thanks. Can you see my screen? Oh,
Yes.
perfect.